and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion. I'm Ladi Akiri. The headlines. President Zelensky says he's ready to discuss neutral status for Ukraine. Ukrainian negotiators say Russia-Ukraine talks will take place in person this week in Istanbul, Turkey. Plus, international humanitarian movement Red Cross says it is still unable to reach Mariupol. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says his government is prepared to discuss adopting a neutral status as part of a peace deal with Russia, but he's insisting on the territorial integrity of his country after earlier suggesting that he was ready for a compromise in peace talks with Russia. In his video message to the Ukrainian people late yesterday, Mr. Zelensky says there was a new round of negotiations coming up and that his government's priorities remain the same. Mr. Zelensky says his priorities are sovereignty and territorial integrity, as face-to-face negotiations are due to take place in Istanbul, Turkey. He earlier said he was willing to discuss Ukraine adopting a neutral status, a major point of contention with Russia. Meanwhile, the head of the Russian delegation to those peace talks, Vladimir Medinsky, said that the two sides had agreed at a virtual meeting to hold in-person negotiations on March the 29th and 30th, but without saying where those talks would be held. David Krahamir, leader of the ruling party Servant of the People faction of Ukraine, and a member of the Ukrainian delegation, said also yesterday that the next round of face-to-face talks between Ukraine and Russia will take place, but he announced that they'd take place in Turkey between today and the 30th. According to Turkish media, the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Russian President Vladimir Putin had a phone conversation on the latest situation in the conflict as well as on peace talks. The two leaders agreed that the new round of negotiations will be carried out in Istanbul, but without mentioning exactly when those talks would be held. And what might be good news for students in the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, that they'll be able to resume school today via remote learning online. The city's mayor announced the reopening, saying courses would be, quote, more adapted to the current conditions using different educational platforms. According to Vitaly Klitschko, an important task is for the city to live and work even in such difficult conditions of martial law. The UN estimates that more than half of the nation's children have fled the country during this conflict. The International Committee of the Red Cross says it is still unable to get any aid into the besieged city of Mariupol, as it requires Russia and Ukraine to guarantee safe passage. The sides have to be the guarantors, and an agreement to allow safe passage has to be reached. They have to publicize the route and allow plenty of time for people to get out. And that's according to the ICRC spokesman, Matt Morris. We don't have a team currently able to access the city. International humanitarian law requires that people should be allowed to live, but should not be forced to live. Many Mariupol residents have been sheltering in cellars for weeks, short of food, water, and medicines. Ukraine accuses Russia of forcibly moving thousands of civilians from the devastated city to Russian-controlled areas. Russia has denied any coercion, but has reported evacuations under Russian escort. The ICRC says it never assists any forced evacuations and has denied any plan to help Russia, quote, filter Ukrainian refugees from Mariupol. The amount of humanitarian aid arriving in Ukraine is beginning to wane even as the Russian bombardment persists. Speaking at a cargo warehouse near Warsaw's Chopin Airport during a delivery of medical equipment facilitated by Charity Direct Relief, the Ukrainian Deputy Health Minister Oleksandr Usyk says more support is desperately needed. He said he hoped the decrease was due to some pause to find new resources and said support should be given now rather than delaying weeks or months. Direct Relief CEO Thomas Taye said the group was working to give the Ukrainian healthcare system more support in taking care of traumatic injuries. The shipment bound for Ukraine included everything from metal beds to gauze to asthma inhalers and oxygen concentrators.
For the last week, what we see that the level of humanitarian support a little bit down. We hope that it will some pause to find new resources. And because of Russia aggression are increasing and they are bombing civilians, so we need more humanitarian support from our partners. What we are asking, if you can support, please support right now. Don't wait for weeks or months, because we need the support right now.
I understand it. They had all the issues that pre-existed the war, the chronic issues, and a whole new set of issues from the invasion, the bombing, the targeting of civilians. So in addition to the overall needs that existed that have been largely disrupted by the war, there's a whole new set of injuries, traumatic care, acute victims, and obviously a huge dislocation of millions of people within the country and millions who fled.
Poland, which has received the highest number of refugees from Ukraine so far, says it will continue to accept them. Polish authorities say the country has seen over 2.2 million refugees crossing into its borders since the conflict began. Charity organizations on the Polish side have been giving out free food and water to the fleeing Ukrainians. The refugees in Poland are granted 18 months visas, which gives them access to many social welfare services. As men of conscription age, that's 18 to 60, are not allowed to leave Ukraine, women and child refugees fleeing into Poland must now find a way to put food on their tables. That's notwithstanding, the spokesperson for the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Lucas Jusinia, says Poland will keep receiving refugees and in an even more organized way.
Firstly, we still continue to accept refugees. Now we hope with better help from our European allies to try to organize more mutual helpful projects. Second, the Polish state is changing this acceptation of the refugees into more organized, state-organized. Next week, Polish Prime Minister will present a program how to deal with in next few years with Russian gas, oil and coal inside the European Union, and change this coal, for example, for a coal from Australia, or change that oil and gas facilities for the other directions.
There's a lot on the humanitarian situation, the crisis, aid, how to get it across, who is receiving it, who is not. Let's talk to human rights activist Olatunji Barua, joins us virtually. Good morning, nice to see you, Olatunji. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, pleasure to be here.
This humanitarian situation seems to have quite a number of legs. First, there is the issue of the aid, getting money to supply aid, then getting it into the areas where it is needed most, and then getting the people who need it most to have access to it, and then if there is need, getting people out of the place without being seen to force them. Let's start with that last point. If there's a war situation, how do you get people to leave without seeming to force them, especially if their lives are in danger, as has been the case in this conflict?
You usually will require the cooperation of all the parties in a conflict to get people out of that conflict zone. And having all the parties in the conflict come to the table, is what usually leads to the humanitarian corridor, cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire. Sometimes it's a truce, sometimes it's a temporary ceasefire. And that's the situation we've had with the evacuations we've had out of eastern Ukraine, out of the southern parts. The evacuations that have happened in Mariupol and I think Odessa and all, the other regions. I think we also have evacuations from Irpin, from Kherson. Most of those evacuations were as a result of, temporary, stay of hostilities, and then so that people could move. And we know that it's particularly very dangerous. So when you move from that, you need cooperation of all parties. The Russian Federation has to, halt the shelling and bombing. And the Ukrainians also have to, hold off on their defenses and their firing retaliations. So when you have that, you are going to have some certain level semblance of peace so that evacuation trucks, buses can happen and people can be gotten. You can move people to the train station. You can use evacuation flight if necessary. But I think that's particularly, so many things are very dangerous to do in Ukraine right now. And so, and I know that today there's supposed to be a physical meeting by the delegations of the two countries in Turkey, in the capital of Turkey, and which might lead to there's a ray of hope that is looking likely from the meeting that will happen today in Turkey. And if we are able to get that, we'll be able to get people out. But now getting aid to people is also another complicated issue. And, there are certain level of distrust by all parties. The Russian Federation might probably feel that this might be a ploy by the Ukrainians to get weapons into those territories so that they can defend their, hold their positions. And that's why they are very, very reluctant in allowing, trucks of aid to come into the region. And you also feel that hunger, it's against humanitarian law. Using hunger as a tool of warfare is against international law. But for the Russians, the strategy seems to be that the more you starve the Ukrainians of electricity, the more you starve the Ukrainians of access to food, access to water. They do not even have access to gas at the moment, and that's the only thing they use to keep warm in this particular season. That the more you have this situation, the likelihood that the Ukrainians will fold and give in to the Russians. And that has not turned out to be so. And so that's the reluctance of the Russian in allowing aid to get to the people. You feel that if food gets to them, then they are re-energized to fight and continue fighting. So that's a problem on its own. And that's why a lot of different bodies across the world are already documenting, evidence of war crimes against the Russians. And that is happening.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Different parts from.
I'm sorry to interrupt at this point, but you see, what you've described now would appear to be very, logical. But then when you have a situation of war, many of this logic, or most of this logic, gets thrown out of the window. And I return to the original point, which is the difficulty that the humanitarian organizations are faced with, which is people's lives are in danger. Clearly, their lives are in danger from bombardment, from shelling, from hunger, all the things you've described. But then when the opportunity comes for them to make good an escape to wherever that is safer, then that also becomes contentious because you are not, under humanitarian law, allowed to coerce them into leaving, even if their lives are in danger. But if they remain in the areas, their lives will continue to be in danger.
You need to also understand that if you see the pattern of the evacuations and the way people have moved, you see that we've had the movement of mostly the elderly, children, and women. Most of the men, if you remember at the onset of this war, the Ukrainian government resolved that all young men between the ages of 18 and 60 must stay to fight for their land. And so you are going to have a situation where most of the men, the adolescent men, most of them will refuse to move. They will refuse to leave because they have been harmed to defend the country as it stands right now. So you can't force them to move. There was a video, there was a report I read over the weekend where Zelensky was saying that they are trying to get some of their, trapped military forces out of Mariupol, and they have refused because they said they will not leave without their dead. That's the military, the soldiers, the Ukrainian army said they won't leave without their dead. So those are the kind of situation we are going to be faced with in this, pattern. But you also have, there are other instances of the Russian bossing people forcefully against their will to Russia. At some point, Russia created a humanitarian corridor that leads only to Russia and Belarus. And, that was also a problem for the other side. But the last report I saw, there have been about 60 to 72,000, between 60 to 70,000 people have been forced against their will, evacuated to Russia, and their passports and identity cards seized by the Russian government. And those are issues that are ongoing. It's a very fluid situation. The United Nations, the UN OCHA, UN Refugee Commission, everybody will be on top of that. And I know that they want to get to the end of that, even though the Russians are being very intransigent in dealing with, the international bodies. They feel isolated and victimized. And, that's another conversation on its own. But here we are. You are going to continue to have those corridors will open. A lot of people will refuse to move, especially those who have been harmed, who are in the armed forces, those who are resolved to defend Ukrainian land. They will refuse to move. But children, like so far, I know that we were told about over 4 point something million children have been displaced within Ukraine, and that's about 50% of Ukrainian kids. About 50% of them, about 4.2 million thereabout, have been displaced. So
let's come to the issue. Let's come to the issue of the aid now. There are two things here. There's a question of sourcing the aid, getting the resources for it, and then getting it into where it is most needed. Now, it appears as if there's opportunity to source for the aid. The problem is getting it into where it is needed. And again, you have humanitarian law insisting that both parties must sign up before the humanitarian organization can move convoys or can move aid into those areas. Do you see in a situation like this an opportunity where that can be easily done? Because it doesn't seem as if that's what's happening now.
No, it won't be easily done. It will ultimately happen. But my fear and pain is that by the time it will happen, a lot more damages will have been inflicted on the people who are in tight and terrible condition right now. And every day as the day progresses, people are dying of hunger. People are dying of the extreme weather condition right now. People are dying of lack of access to water, lack of access to light. And so you have hospitals without light right now at the moment. And very serious and urgent medical supplies needs to get in. And that's why this negotiation has to happen. But my fear and pain is that by the time we will get to a resolution, more lives will have been lost painfully. And that is a situation that is tragic. But I know that a lot of parties are working around the clock. You find that the Israeli government is also involved in this negotiation. The Turkish government is involved in this negotiation. You also have, there's a few other parties involved, but the most credible mediation going on right now are the ones led by the Israeli government and the Turkish Federation. And I hope that they will be able to get something tangible at the end of today or before the end of this week. Because every day, about almost 80% of Mariupol has been, turned to rubble as we speak. And people are living in basements and people are barely surviving. That has to change. And you can't get aid into there. You can't put personnel that work with UN OCHA and UN refugees or even the WHO. You can't get them into Russia without the cooperation of both parties before, you can't even get the logistics operators to get in there without clear signal that their lives will be safe. And so that's a very complex situation. It will never be easy. And it might take longer, and that's the painful part of this. The tragic part of it is also that some people, by the time the help will get to them, it might probably be too late. But we will have to deal with this. Every day, the situation is fluid, and every day, as the day unfolds, we are going to see new developments that might bring ray of hope for everybody, at least most of us on the other side of the world, looking at this situation and trying to see what can be done, how best can, it also look like, you look at the United Nations, the body looks helpless at the moment, that you expect that the UN should be able to wade into this and persuade both parties to just halt and let's just get humanitarian need to people. But that's not going to happen, and that's not happening right now. And it's a pattern in conflicts, especially when you have a superpower involved. But the Russian approach has been particularly very different from what we have seen in recent past. Yeah, it would not be decent to compare, the invasion of Iraq and the other crises in Syria. We had humanitarian corridors in those places. some humanitarian corridors were open, and then, people, help were got into people were, hissed out of those territories, and the militants who hope to stay, who decided to remain in those places. But I hope this will change in the course of this week. And I'm talking about aid. Getting the aid is the easiest part of it. About a week or two ago, the U.S. Congress approved about $13.2 billion in humanitarian aid to Ukraine. And there's been a flurry of support coming from the West, coming from the European Union, coming even from, the eastern part of the world. So that's going to continue to happen. Talking about fund for humanitarian intervention, they will never lack that, because there's solidarity. The wind of solidarity is on the back of the Ukrainians at the moment, and that will continue to flow in. But getting it in there is going to be the complicated part, and that's where you need everybody to be at the table. America.
All right, then. Olatunji Larry Barua.
Yes.
Olatunji Larry Barua. I wish we had more time to explore this, but I want to thank you for joining us this morning from the nation's capital, Abuja. Thank you so very much. And we're taking a break at this point, but when we come back, Ukrainian Canadians watch Stop War Telethon to show their support for the embattled nation. Please join us again. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is another opportunity for Africa to take the lesson of self-sufficiency in food production, as well as the importance of structure and institutions. Former president of the American Center for International Leadership, Stephen Hayes, was speaking to me earlier on our current affairs program, Newsnight, where he insisted that the continent of Africa, including Nigeria, could feed the entire planet because it has, by some estimates, up to 90% of the remaining arable land in the world. Mr. Hayes says the strategic importance of Russia and Ukraine is demonstrated by the dependence of many parts of the world on them for critical resources which Africa could have provided.
The reality is that Africa could supply the entire world with grain. It has a very, I've forgotten the percentage, but it's a very high percentage, and maybe as high as 90% of the world's arable land that is still available for cultivation is not being cultivated. So Africa could be the grain basket for the world, not only for itself. Whether, in fact, it's going to be able to make that transition is going to depend on a number of factors. It's going to depend on governance and when I say that, the policies towards agriculture and agribusiness in various countries. It's going to depend on a greater openness of trade and development in the agriculture sector. And in this, I find interesting in that we go back to the old Soviet Union, in which they pushed industrialization over agriculture and had a great deal of starvation in the 1920s. So particularly in Ukraine again. But I think that the debate ahead for Africa is are they going to develop agriculture as much as they are on industrialization? And I think it's really important. I've always been an advocate of stronger agriculture because I think also one of the problems in Africa is the migration to the urban areas and trying to find jobs there. We need in Africa, I think, a greater dispersal of the population, be able to keep and stay in villages and homes, in larger cities as well, not quite the mega cities of Lagos and Abuja. So agriculture is a way to I think, move in that direction. Industrialization, I think, will continue to congregate populations and make it even more difficult on food supplies. Well, benefication or the value added I think is really important for Africa. I think Africa, in a sense, is not even in a sense, historically has been ripped off. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The raw products have been taken out. For instance, let's say in the Sahel area where cotton has been grown and then taken to Europe and then sold back at a higher price to Africa, the clothing sold back to Africa. And you can't advance with that type of process. Botswana has done very well with beneficiation on diamonds, for instance. It's polished, produced, refined the diamonds in Botswana, and it's made Botswana one of the more prosperous countries in Africa. So I think the more that does take place, the better. And you're right, Africa produces a lot of the most strategic minerals in the world right now. Cobalt would be one, particularly from the DRC. That's also going to be interesting because those cobalt mines have been Russian mines. So what is some of them? So what is the effect of the global embargo on Russian issues? Also in Angola, the major mine in Angola is Russian. So it's obviously going to affect those. So to me, this just underlines the importance of having beneficiation in each of these countries as much as possible. To do that, again, though, it requires a reliable supply chain from mine to production to market. And this also requires stronger infrastructure. So infrastructure is going to have to be built certainly at a more rapid pace than it is being built now, especially in those countries with the strategic minerals, Angola, Mozambique, DRC, Central Africa area, especially, but it's not exclusively. So it comes back to governance. It comes back to good policy and developing a supply chain, and I think to some extent developing a stronger private sector.
You can watch the rest of the interview tonight at 9 p.m. right here on Channels Television. The program is Newsnight. And the United States president considers his Russian counterpart a war criminal and a butcher and says he should not be in power for long. But even the United States and the West have been called out for their own interventions in wars across the globe where innocent civilians have been killed without anyone fighting for their justice. The professor of African politics, African development and international relations at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, Professor Christopher Keke, believes this is a reflection of the racism that exists even in international politics and relations.
Well, yes, that's correct. That the West has behaved in this sort of way, disrespecting international law and international norms. You mentioned Iraq, you mentioned Syria. These are examples, and many critics of the West have used this whataboutism, as excuse for why Russia should, be, allowed to do what it is doing. But I think that it should go beyond that because if this conflict, I've said elsewhere, provides a silver lining for the world and for Africa especially to push for a redefinition of the international system, one that will be more inclusive of geographies like Africa, and a world that will be more equitable, and a push for a reform of the United Nations Security Council, where countries would not just, it won't be for countries that are friends with one another, or countries that are there because of the power that they have. It should also recognize the power of demographics, so that countries like Nigeria, for example, should have very good reason why they should be part of that decision-making body, irrespective of what happens within Nigeria itself as a country.
The rest of that interview is on a diplomatic channel with Amarachi Ubani. It is today at 8:30 p.m. On Sky, that's our UK platform, and then at 11:30 p.m. on DSTV. Let's talk to public affairs analyst Oluseyi Adeyemo, who joins us virtually here in the nation's commercial capital. Nice to see you, Mr. Adeyemo. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, laddie.
several arguments going on side by side. There's the humanitarian side, there's the legal side, there's the political side. It's more than a month now, well over a month since all this started. What's your general impression about where we are today?
Okay, as a human being, I mean, I've always said that whether we like it or not, we'll always have situations like this, particularly when you have a superpower that in some way have been eliminated from the center of activities globally. Now, the idea is you would have him come at some point in time to say, look, guys, I'm still here, I'm still relevant, particularly when he discovers that he has a kind of strength that he has. For instance, I mean, we all have discovered now that the large chunk of gas supply to Europe, for instance, comes from Russia. We all have discovered that fertilizer and wheat in Africa comes from Russia. Now, you can have such a country now be treated as not being part of NATO or not being part of the central, governing house of the world. So, in my opinion, this has taught all of us a very, very good lesson. Europe, for instance, we know that they cannot have a situation where the large chunk of their gas is coming from Russia, for instance. And Africa, of course, should also learn and be ready to brace up. For instance, I mean, your last speaker, Ace from America, said this will have been an opportunity for Africa to feed the world, for instance. And we're reneging that responsibility because we probably feel that the rest of the world will continue to feed us. We are the children of the world. We don't understand that God, in His infinite mercy, have given all of us the opportunity to play our role. And once again, we're failing to play our role. So I want to pray that this will be an opportunity for all of us, for US, to learn that they cannot continue to do things that will make them. For instance, a lot of people have said that if US had played their roles in world politics better, maybe they would have stand a chance to speak to Russia, and Russia would be willing to listen to them. But a situation where now that Russia is not willing to listen to them is not a very good situation for the world. So we're having to depend on Turkey now to be the one who is leading the negotiation. So I think this is a lesson for every one of us to check our relationship with ourselves so that when a situation like this occurs, and it will always occur, we would have, we'll be properly or better placed given our role when the time comes like this.
Given what we are now hearing, it does appear as if there's a slight glimmer of hope on the horizon from the meeting that you're talking about, which Turkey is arranging in Istanbul this week, so we're told, because over the weekend, President Zelensky of Ukraine indicated that he may now be willing to discuss a neutral or neutrality status for Ukraine, even though he has refused to countenance the issue of sovereignty. So it still remains to be seen how that will be worked out. The Russians, of course, are feeling the pinch. Also, at the end of last week, they admitted well over 1,000 soldiers of theirs have lost their lives in the conflict. More and more resistance is taking place, and then there is the economic toll as well. So do you think, as it is now, the conditions, regardless of who is leading them, the conditions now are ripe for a step back and for both sides to consider more of jaw than war, as they would say? Okay. Are you still able to hear me, Mr. Adeyemo? Are you able to hear me, Mr. Adeyemo? All right, we seem to have temporarily possibly lost. Okay, I understand. Mr. Adeyemo, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
My question was, with everything that we have heard now, do you think the atmosphere is ripe for a peace deal, especially considering that the president of Ukraine is saying that he's willing now to look at a neutral status for Ukraine? Russia is feeling the pinch as well. So it might be a bit more amenable to a deal, regardless of who is leading it?
I mean, like I said, I was going to answer. I mean, unfortunately, the network was playing up. The thing is, it will be irresponsible of Russia and Ukraine at this time not to look at all the options on the table, because not that they are feeling the pinch, the whole world is feeling the pinch of whether you want to describe it as an invasion or war right now that is going on. Everybody is feeling the pinch, and I want to believe that the reasonable thing and the right thing to do is for everyone to be willing to look at how they would look at sort of taking a step back and considering whatever, I mean, is possible right now, because it is obvious that nobody's winning. I mean, Russia probably didn't bargain for the kind of resistance they're getting. They probably didn't bargain for the kind of reaction they're getting from the rest of the world. And they probably didn't bargain for the fact that the war was going to last this long. And I also want to believe that Ukrainians probably didn't believe that this kind of thing will come upon them. I mean, they are obviously losing a lot of people that are dying, and they're losing a lot of, they're not getting the kind of humanitarian support they thought they would get. They probably are not getting the kind of support they thought they could get from NATO. They probably thought NATO could just walk all over Russia. So it is obvious that the state we are in right now, it is not good for all of us. It's not good for both Russia and Ukraine and the rest of the world. So the earlier, the better we get it sorted, the better for all of us.
All right, then. Thank you so very much, Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, for joining us this morning. Of course, we'll look forward to having you back at some point in time, not too far in the future, possibly when we get a peace deal or even before that. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, then. So let's talk some business news. You had heard last week, towards the end of the week, that Russia was considering selling its oil and gas for cryptocurrencies. And now that has continued to drive quite a lot of activity on Bitcoin itself. Today, Bitcoin is trading at over $46,000, up more than 4% for the day before the announcement of the Bitcoin being used for oil and gas. It was only 43K at that point. So let's talk to my colleague, Ini John Mekwa. Ini, good morning.
Good morning.
It looks like it's a good Monday start for the
for crypto
Bitcoins,
investors. Yes, it is. It's been since late Friday. I mean, by morning on Friday, I know when Ladi came for the crypto segment, it was about 43. And then by the end of the day, when this announcement came up, it hit 45. And as we speak, it's more than 46. Maybe by the end of today, to be heading
maybe even further up than that.
Exactly, because what this would do, obviously, is to put more attention and demand on Bitcoin and on the crypto space. So that means if the European countries agree to this, because they're still asking for it, there's not been an agreement yet. You know, even when they asked for rubles, you know, to be paid for gas, there was a talk of contracts. There are contracts that have been signed before now, so you don't just wake up in the middle of a contract or in the middle of action and then change the terms of the contract. Right. So I mean, this is just a request, but of course we'll see how it goes, because we will say they have the knife and they have the you know what I'm saying? I do. You know what I'm saying? Because the European countries are actually in a tight corner now. They're trying to get alternative. In fact, they've reached out to Nigeria to say, come on guys, can you give us gas? You know, and let's stop depending so much on Russia. So eventually, if it happens, that means countries, not just individuals now, would have to have or create their own crypto wallets. Right. You know, to be able to, of course, take advantage of all of this. Because you pay pair to pair. You know, mostly. It's not actually in physical transactions. Not at all. So like the e-Naira wallet, you have to create a wallet, you fund it, and then you can now transfer, you know, to the other country. And of course, you know, when it comes to countries, it's a huge amount of money, institutional trades and all that. So that is driving Bitcoin. Imam doesn't have Bitcoin, will be smiling at this time. And I was almost tempted to ask if you had it, because it looks like those who have at this point are going to be
at an advantage.
Yeah.
Now, the ruble is also
Yes,
also doing well.
Doing well, responding to this, you know, because the ruble was like dying at that time. A lot of people had left it, and just China and India were trying to have their currency exchange,
right,
you know, to try to make it more relevant. But with this now, and with the request that ruble should be used for gas, it's really gaining. It's coming up. It's almost 100.
And I know there was a time when we were talking about 133.
133. Last week it was 107.
Right.
It was 107, but this one now is about 99. So, I mean, it's really going fast. And I think there's a think tank that came together in Russia and like, come on, let's
try this, let's try this,
exactly,
let's try this.
And then we're seeing this happening at this time. It's helping them.
It also seems as if the stock market, contrary to all expectations, the stock market is also
honestly, I have to tell you, I think the economic think tank in Russia, they just woke up and they just have some ideas. So, you know, last week they started trading after 1 month. I think that was on Thursday.
Yes, on Thursday.
This morning, and that was just the equities. Now, that's the stock. Now, they're selling the bonds, they're selling their commodities, that's, you know, the metals and all that. All of that is open, even though it is very restricted. On Friday, they only allow 33 stocks to sell. This morning, they're going to allow all Russian stocks to sell. But if you're a non-resident, you cannot partake in it. And it's also for half a day, you know, so it's not for the full day. So there's still a lot of artificial value to it, but they seem, you know, to be having some great ideas at this time.
There's the issue of maritime trade, though.
Yeah, for Ukraine.
Yes.
For Ukraine. You know, I don't know if a lot of people know that is why Mariupol seems to be
so
a
important
target at this time. Yes, because it's where they have their major port. It's what connects them to the Black Sea. And that is, I mean, 5 countries are using the Black Sea to do their, especially grain. When we say, oh, Russia is giving 25%, or Russia and Ukraine are doing about 25% of grains, it is the Black Sea that they use. Russia,
Belarus, Ukraine.
Yes, Ukraine, Turkey. That's why Turkey is so interested
in re-establishing peace very quickly.
Yes, because, I mean, they really need the Black Sea, you know. So at this time, the UK is saying that Ukraine has been cut off international, or is almost cut off international maritime trade, which is a major stay of the country. Number one, Mariupol is almost not existing. Their ports, which is where they get their stuff, grains and all, out of the country. And the Black Sea also, you know, part of it has been taken over by Russia.
By Russia, and then they have their fleet there as well.
Exactly. So, I mean, the country, that's Ukraine, and now is really suffering a whole lot of blows on many sides, and this is just one side. And you know also that Mariupol is where they have their major steel factories, which has been blown down. You know, so it's going to take a lot.
There's a lot that will need to happen, even if peace is restored.
Yes.
Talking on the business side, and talking on the maritime side, and talking on even currency stabilization, both for Ukraine and for Russia.
And for Russia, because even if they open up...
a lot of people who are just waiting and don't want to dump.
And they're doing bonds now. Bonds is government trying to raise money or trying to mop up excess currency, you know, because of inflation, to mop up. That's what the bond is. But they will not open it to the outside world. You know, it's very dangerous. A lot of people just dump, and I don't want to...
And no matter what the haircut is, they're going to get rid of it.
Let's just do it and get away with it.
Absolutely. A lot to unpack, as I always say. Ini, thank you so much.
Thank you for
Ini will be here with Laddie Williams on our business shows later, right after this show on Business Morning, and then later on at 1:30 on Business Incorporated.
Thank you for having us.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, songs of patriotism and defiance meet refugee spirits at an Odessa station. Please stay with us. Welcome back. It's over a month, well over a month, since the Russian invasion began. As war rages above ground, Ukrainians have sought safety wherever they can, metro stations and basements included. In the bunkers and underground tunnels, life continues, even as explosions continue overhead. Our next report takes a look at life in Ukraine for ordinary citizens over a month into Russia's invasion of their country.
A month into Russia's invasion, This is the life in Ukraine. Cities reduced to rubble, long lines for humanitarian aid, and hundreds sheltering underground, like in Kharkiv's metro system. Natalia Shaposhnik and her daughter, Veronica, have been living in a blue and yellow train far underground Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, since the beginning of Russia's invasion. Surely, it's not better than home, but it's livable. One can say our living conditions are better than others. What I mean is, we're not right on the platform. My child and I are in the carriage. We get food, there's a toilet, so we're doing as fine as we can in this situation. For 4 long weeks, Shaposhnik and hundreds like her have hunkered down inside a station in the north of the city, many of whom have endured near daily shelling. Above them, destroyed or heavily damaged buildings line the eerily quiet streets. A couple hundred miles to the south, the scene is no better in the battered city of Mariupol, where long lines for humanitarian aid have filled a former shopping center.
My husband didn't make it to receive humanitarian aid. He had diabetes. The scarce diet of the last days led him to a coma, and he died. If he could have made it for the aid, he'd be alive. I still can't tell the Russian relatives he passed away.
Many have evacuated the port city for temporary shelter in Russia's southern city of Taganrog. 83-year-old Riza Kairat says she lost contact with her daughter and grandchild when the siege started. So beautiful Mariupol used to be, and suddenly it's been reduced to dust. Schools nearby were destroyed. Why would anyone destroy the houses where people lived? What for? Russia continues to deny targeting civilians and calls its invasion a special military operation.
Supporters of Ukraine braved Toronto's chilly weather to show their support for the embattled nation as they watched the Stop War Telethon in a public square. Canada is home to nearly 1.4 million people of Ukrainian origin, making it the Western Hemisphere's top location of Ukrainians living outside their country. Ukrainian Canadians are calling on NATO to institute a no-fly zone over Ukraine to stop Russia from bombing civilian sites, and also on Russians to pressure President Vladimir Putin since they put him in office.
Differently. For us, every day that passes seems like a lifetime. Our children.
Right. Well, right now we really ask the world to close the sky. If NATO can close the sky, Ukrainian will finish the rest. If they don't want to fight, we will finish it. But the biggest message right now to the whole world is to close the sky, so there won't be no more shellings of civilians and apartment buildings, kids, people, elderly. If they will close the sky from shelling bombs and jets, the rest is for us and we will win.
The most important to end this war is for Russia to stop the war. If they stop the war, then there won't be any war. But if Ukraine will stop fighting, there will be no Ukraine. This is the genocide against the Ukrainian nation. They have to understand that. And we will fight, and Ukrainians are strong, and they're furiously fighting at this moment. So I believe Russia has to stop. I would like to send a message to all Russians to stop this, to stop Putin. You voted for him, majority of you. Those who don't support, they come out on the streets. They are being imprisoned. I really feel for those people, and they're strong to bring up this issue, but we would like more Russians to support Ukrainians and stop sending the troops and stop Putin.
Stop this war in Ukraine. To stand with Ukraine. Please stop this war.
Let's take a look at some sports news related to this conflict. Nigeria's Victor Moses' hopes for a return to the Premier League for a short stint with Burnley have been dashed. Already denied a chance of fighting for silverware in the Europa League, where his club, Spartak Moscow, was bundled out in the round of 16, Moses wanted to explore the waiver given to players in Russia and Ukraine. Russia's invasion of Ukraine last month resulted in both domestic leagues being suspended. This development saw FIFA and UEFA jointly elect to allow players from teams in the two countries to join other European teams on short-term deals until the end of the season. But reports in London reveals the Clarets' attempts to bring the former Chelsea star back to England from Russia have hit the brick walls. Moses, Burnley and Spartak Moscow were all open to him playing in England until the end of the season. But the Premier League club has been informed that they cannot sign Moses on a short-term deal due to concerns over the sporting integrity of the competition. Italy's Serie A and Germany's Bundesliga have also prevented transfers for similar reasons, and the only one that allows it is La Liga. Oleksandr Usyk has been backed by Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, after he left Ukraine to prepare for his fight with Anthony Joshua. Following Russia's invasion of the country, the IBF, WBO, and WBA heavyweight champion returned home to join the local territorial defense force in Kiev. But after being given permission to cross the border into Poland, the fight is set to take place in June. Promoter Eddie Hearn is hoping to host the fight in the United Kingdom, even though he's received several offers to put the show on in the Middle East or America. These are times of immense hardship for Ukraine, and Usyk will hope to make his country proud by retaining his titles. German cyclist Tony Martin has confirmed he will auction his silver medal from the 2012 London Olympics to raise money for children affected by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Many in the cycling world have made efforts to help those affected by the conflict, most notably former pro and current Trek Sagafro director Yaroslav Popovich, who is taking leave from team duties to ferry supplies to his home country, and Lachlan Morton, who has raised over $200,000 by cycling over 1,000 kilometers from Munich to the Poland-Ukraine border, showing that war is just a ride away. The auction is open until the 9th of April. The director of football of Ukrainian Premier League club Shakhtar Donetsk, Dario Senna, has issued a desperate plea to stop killing after rescuing more than 100 children. Senna escaped the Ukraine war zone after a 36-hour car journey to safety in his native country, Croatia, and immediately plotted the safe passage of 100 kids from his Shakhtar Donetsk academy to sanctuary in Split, many of them with their mothers after being rescued from Russian bombs and missiles. An accomplished right-back who was awarded 134 caps by Croatia, Senna helped Shakhtar win 10 league titles and the UEFA Cup. They were forced to leave the 50,000-capacity Donbas arena after Mr. Putin's troops annexed the region. After being forced to relocate to the NSC Olimpiyskiy in Kiev, the club's 85-year history is in suspense. And finally, with their country at war, Odessa's opera troupe switched the stage of their iconic opera house for the walls of the city's train station, singing traditional songs to help lift the spirits of refugees fleeing the area. The group performed patriotic songs, Ukrainian folk tunes and songs, chronicling the country's more recent battles with Russian incursions into Donbass in 2014. At the beginning of the conflict, the three singers had helped prepare the city's defenses by making sandbags, but as time went on, they decided their efforts would be better used in lifting people's spirits through their music. As always, we try to end on a note of optimism. Thank you for watching. That's our show this morning. There'll be an update at 5 o'clock later on today, and the show will be back tomorrow. Do enjoy the rest of your day. I'm Ladi Akere Gulwale.